Hi, I'm Jeff Dean, your Player Development Director, and today's coaching tip is on how to hit it longer. Another installation of how to hit the ball longer. A lot of us talk about how to hit it farther. Many of my students experience challenges to get on the green in regulation. They hit a driver, they hit a fairway, and then sometimes you're left with a hybrid to the green in their third shot and struggle with distance. So today we're going to talk about how to add distance, different than what we've talked about so far, and that is in the air versus on the ground. It's imperative to understand that there's less friction in the air than there is on the ground. Many of us say, well, you know, I hit a low ball and it runs a mile and it goes much farther than the ball in the air. Well, it depends on the conditions, but there's no great mystery in terms of physics. It's much easier to fly the ball in the air versus running it on the ground. The ball is going to stop a lot faster if it's on the ground. So our goal today, or my goal, is to show you a couple of tips to keep the ball in the air longer on all your ball flights. So many of my students have struggled with carrying the ball over lakes, over bunkers, and so forth. So today's tip is just going to be on how to keep the ball in the air a little longer. So join me for a moment out in my outdoor teaching facility, and let's get right to it. Before I take you out into the teaching area, I want to show you a couple of things about the clubs we're talking about. Many of us struggle with the longer clubs. You know, we hit our driver, fairway, and hybrid. Well, this is my hybrid, and I'm holding it up on purpose, and I'm holding it flat in my hand. And if you notice the natural loft of the club face and the way in which the angle of the shaft is leaning, I'm not leaning the club backward. I'm literally holding it as flat as I can or level as I can. But if you could notice, the shaft angle is actually leaning backward. And if I were to bring in my fairway, this would be considered a 3-wood, if you will. You can see how the shaft is leaning backward. It's not leaning forward. And if you notice here, as I lean the shaft forward, that I've what we call de-lofted the club face. Well, what does that do? It's going to help you to hit the ball lower, and that's not what we want. If I have a driver in my hand, I have a 9.5 degree driver, so it's, it's not a lot of loft on it, but if you notice how I'm holding it flat on my hand, as level as I can, you can see the loft, the natural loft of the club face, and the fact that the shaft angle is leaning backward. Well, that's how we're supposed to be at impact. We're not supposed to be like that at impact with the driver, because if you look at it like that, look how I've de-lofted that club. So I've literally turned my 9.5 degree driver into 2 degrees by leaning it forward. So as we get out here in the teaching area, I'm going to show you a couple of helpful tips to what we call maintain the natural loft of the club face, which is going to help you to launch it higher. Some simple tips to get you going. Okay, meet me outside. I'll see you in a second. Today we're here to learn how to hit the ball higher, which is ultimately going to help you hit the ball farther. So let's talk a little bit about what I just described a moment ago about how the club should naturally sit on the ground. If you take a look at a wedge and you lay it flat on the ground, you can see how the shaft angle is leaning forward. That's kind of how it should be at impact. Well, by its own design, we're supposed to hit down on the golf ball and create a more descending attack angle on the ball. And by the design of the club, makes the ball spin more and the ball goes higher. Okay, but that's not the case when we're talking about fairways and hybrids and drivers. If you look at the design of the club itself, laying it relatively flat in my hand, you can see how the shaft angle is leaning fairly vertically or even backward a little bit. Well, what does that mean? It means that you're not supposed to be like that at impact, because what's happened is you will have de-lofted the club face so much that the ball goes lower. You're supposed to have the club more like that at impact. And if you look at your fairway and your driver, that's very much the case. So how do we establish a good impact position where the club is in the right place at the right time? It starts in your setup. When you set up to the golf ball, much like this, you want to make sure that you take your left foot or your lead foot and then your back foot goes out a little bit more. And what does that do? That automatically sets my chin and my spine angle for right-handers to the right of the golf ball. So if I were to take this stick as a description here, and start over and take my stance, I start out left foot, right foot as a right-hander. Notice my chin and my spine angle are slightly behind the golf ball. My target is that way. It's critical to establish your spine tilt behind the golf ball in order to create the correct impact position. So when I take a club in my hand, I'll do the same thing. I take my stance, and you can see how my chin and spine tilt are behind the golf ball, and you can also see how the shaft angle is leaning a little bit that way. If I had my spine tilt leaning forward, you can see how that's changing the loft of the shaft. And if I'm set up that way at address, more than likely I'm going to be that way at impact. So let's make sure that I set my chin to the right as for right-handers, the opposite for left-handers. And here's the caveat to that. That's the beginning. That's where you are at your setup. But you have to maintain that position through impact and to full extension. So what do I mean by that? Once you get set up in that position, you take it all the way to the top of your backswing. As you unwind, you've got to make sure that your spine and your chin remain behind the golf ball through impact to full extension. Now once I get to this position on the other side, then I can rotate up and out of it. But if I take the club up and adjust my spine angle beforehand and my chin and so forth, more than likely the club shaft is going to come into the golf ball at the wrong angle. You're going to de-loft the flight, and if you move ahead of the golf ball, chances are you're going to hit it offline as well. So it's highly critical to hit the ball higher and in effect straighter if you maintain your chin and spine, this line right here, behind the golf ball through impact. So as you take it back again, quick review, rotate behind it. As I unwind, let's make sure that I stay behind it, deliver the club, release the club, and then rotate up and out of it to your finish. Okay, for further information about this golf tip or others, feel free to contact me at gdean@pgawest.com. I encourage you to get out there and try this technique and see how it works, and I'll talk to you soon.